We begin a new series today, and I've appropriately titled this message, Legend Status, because who doesn't want to have legend status in something or some area of their lives? And as we begin this series, I want to kind of talk to you about words, specifically the meaning and the weight of words. Now, as someone who makes a living writing, speaking thousands of words literally every single week, I value words. I value what they mean. I value their significance. I value how powerful they can be. I value how appropriate they can be. I value where the placement of a word is in a sentence because it matters and it changes things and it brings understanding. It illuminates things. But at the same time, for as much as I value words, I find it fascinating how we can live and speak and dialogue with one another in such a way where we reduce the meaning of words. We can take words that have such kind of potent power and such specificity and kind of relegate them and reduce them to nothing, where their meaning or their substance is kind of rendered meaningless. And I'll give you two examples of this, okay? Two words that are very common that are used in a lot of ways. One is the word love, right? Love, a rich word, full of depth, full of breadth, full of meaning, full of kind of personal connotation. And yet we can use the word love in this way. I say, I love Butterfingers, and with the same breath say, I love my wife. Yet, hopefully, in a genuine sense, I don't love them in the same way, right? Hopefully my wife is kind of supersedes my love for Butterfingers. Yet, we would use the word love in that same way. Rather than I like Butterfingers, I enjoy Butterfingers. They're satisfying, they're crunchy, they're chewy, they're peanut buttery, they get stuck in your teeth and you got to pick at them for like 3 days. But I love Butterfingers. That's where we end up, is I love Butterfingers. And so yet this word that has such meaning and such personal connection can be reduced to simplify in an oversimplified way, using it to talk about a candy bar. Another word, every white girl's favorite, literally. I literally can't. I literally can't do that. I literally can't do this. Actually, that's a word that's so specific and it's so maybe quantifying, and yet we use it for the exact opposite way that it was intended to be used. No, you literally could if you just stopped saying you literally can't. You literally could. It's actually that simple. All it requires is you to get up and walk over there. I literally can't go talk to her. No, you literally could. I mean, it's literally that easy. And yet we use it in such a kind of obscure way, right? And the reason I bring all this stuff up and the reason I make mention of words is because our series is titled Live Like Legends, and this word, legends, is another word that is used flippantly. It's another word that's used in kind of a casual, nonchalant way, right? Oh, that guy's a legend, or that experience, that night was legendary. And yet we've taken a word that has meaning, that has substance, and we reduce it to kind of like this one night in college with our boys that was somewhat idiotic, probably illegal, and really we shouldn't have done, and yet somehow that fable became legendary. That person became a legend. And so we use it in this kind of casual way, but the word legend is so much bigger, so much more significant than kind of a somewhat illegal or semi-illegal night with your boys, or your girls if you're with your girls. For the guys or the girls who are with either, I guess you want to be all-inclusive here. But the word legend is so much more than that. It's so much bigger than that. And kind of to get us on the same page, to the level set for everyone, I want to define the word legend, not by my own standard, but by how the dictionary defines the word legend. And it's simply this. A legend is a story of regard, which is a key portion of the definition of regard from the past, or one whom inspires such stories. So yes, you had a fun night. Yes, you had a guy who was a crack-up, or yes, you knew a person who did something epic. But does it really qualify as a legend is kind of to be debated, because a legend is really a story of regard. And if you kind of follow this definition throughout, it says not just one that's of regard, but one that's taken as historically factual. And so it's something that's kind of deemed as significance for the light of history, in light of history. It's not just a fun night. It's more than that. It's bigger than that. And yet, again, we call people legends. We say something was legendary. But the reason, again, that I mention all of that is because that is not the way I want to use it in this series. To me, the word legend is a word of meaning. It's a word of substance. It's a word of consequence. It has value to it. And so when we talk about living like legends, we're not just talking about some fun kind of one-night type of thing or one-off type of thing, like, oh yeah, we're just kind of using it in this kind of hyperbolic way and just kind of exaggerating what it could be. But actually what I'm saying to you is that I believe you can and should live like a legend. That I believe your life is worthy of being a story of regard from the past, that in the future, or that you're the one who inspires such stories in the lives of other people. That you have that opportunity. Because here's the thing, if we use this word in a figurative sense, or if we use it as hyperbole, the fact is that if everything is a legend, or if everything is legendary, then nothing is legendary. And nothing or no one is a legend. But if we use it in the sense that it was intended to be used, if we use it as it's meant, then we could live, or we could understand that there is a tier, a status, if you will, a legend status that can be achieved in our lives, particularly in the area of faith. And my desire is that each of you would live those types of lives, that each of you would kind of rise to that level of living a life of faith that becomes one of legend status, that becomes one of regard, that becomes one of, well, no, they lived that way in a historical sense, and it changed history because it changed my life, and it changed that person's life, and it transformed the world or the community that they were a part of, and it shaped how people live their lives moving forward. And that's what this series is about. And I guess to kind of backpedal a little bit, the inspiration for this series actually came from really a quite historic year in my own life in 2015. The original inspiration for this kind of started to take root in my life and in my family's lives 4 years ago now. And 2015 was, I mean, Krista can tell you, it was such a remarkable year for us. It was a year of incredible faith. It was a year of massive restoration. It was a year of personal healing. It was a year of financial provision and blessing that was beyond measure. And I mean, I could sit here and I could tell you story after story after story of what God did in our lives in 2015 and the steps of faith that we had to take in 2015 and how God would just kind of supersede. I could tell you for hours. And it wouldn't be to pat myself on the back. It wouldn't be to kind of exaggerate anything. I mean, I'll give you one example, but we started December 31, 2014 with $0, 0 cents in our checking, savings, and retirement accounts. And the reason was because God had invited us to take everything we had in our bank accounts and give it to him. Say, empty your bank accounts, trust me with everything. And within 2 days' time, by January 2nd, 2015, God had taken what we had given and multiplied it by 5. Random email. Hey, thinking about you, felt like I should give you some money. And what they gave was 5 times the amount that we gave. That was just the start of it. That was just kind of like the tip of the iceberg of what God wanted to do in our lives. And the truth is that as we've journeyed through this year, our lives, or more specifically our faith, became the subject of multiple conversations. The good ones that you want to be the subject of. Not those negative, gossipy ones, but the good ones. Where people, as we're talking, people who are a part of our lives, people who are watching from a distance, are talking with us and connecting with us, and they're like, everything that's happening, like, this is crazy. How are you guys doing this, or how is this happening? You guys need to write a book about this. Like, these are their exact words. You guys need to write a book about this. Your faith is so awe-inspiring. Like, I wish I could live like that. How did you do that, or how did you get there? And then there was kind of this other comment that came from a couple people, but they literally said this: your lives are like Bible characters. And, you know, at first you take that in and you're like, this is really humbling. I mean, it's really, you know, how do you say that? Well, I know it is. The Bible was written about 2,000 years prematurely. They forgot to include me in the book. But yeah, I get what you mean. You know, like, how do you take that? Like, oh, thank you. Yeah, appreciate that. And then so it is quite humbling. You know, when you're having people who are walking side by side with you in life, some in physical proximity, but then some geographically are located far away. And yet they're observing the same thing, they're witnessing the same thing, they're being inspired by the same thing, and they're standing in awe of the faith that you have. But when you start hearing these conversations, or when we started to be a part of these conversations, I found myself humbled, but then it started to transform from like a humbling to kind of a bit of confusion and even frustration. Confusion and frustration because, to me, quite honestly, it was fairly simple. We heard God speak. Well, I guess we started before. We started saying we're going to listen to God. We would hear him speak, and then we would respond in or with faith. That's all it took. Listen for God, hear him speak, respond. And we're like, okay, that's all it is. That's all we're doing. It's not very complicated. It's not very difficult. It's not, something absurd. It's not like we had this one secret that nobody else knows about. And the people who were saying these things, or the people that, were speaking these things to us, were people who had been following Jesus for a long time. So it wasn't like this was someone kind of on the outskirts who didn't know anything about Jesus. These were people who knew Jesus, and because they knew Jesus, they could actually see what Jesus was doing in our lives. And yet they were perplexed by the way we lived our lives. They were confounded, they were startled, they were kind of taken aback and curious in a good way, but just kind of in disbelief that someone could live with that kind of faith. And as I pressed into it further, what I realized was that, my frustration, I kind of realized that's not a healthy place to be. And so let me look into this. Let me start kind of pressing in to see what it is about this that's bothering me and why. And what I realized, number one, me, Krista, our family, we hadn't always lived with that level of faith. So as we decided to live in faith, people started to take notice of the faith that we started to live with. But then two, most Christians don't ever live with any sort of faith beyond believing in Jesus for their salvation. I believe Jesus can save me for the rest of my life. I believe that I can go to heaven. I believe that I can know Jesus, that I can have a relationship with God, and I'll place my faith, because I can't see him, I can't touch him. So I just have to trust that what he said is true and what he did was real. And so I'll believe in him and I'll place my faith in him. But beyond that marker, beyond that point, there's really little to no faith expressed or evidence in the way they live their lives. Things are calculated. Things are planned. A step of faith is not really a step of faith as much as it is just changing a job. And again, it's not to minimize or reduce that, because these aren't bad people. You, me, we're not bad people. It's not like we have this problem. In fact, when it comes to following Jesus, the truth is most of us, most people, those who are here in this room, those who are watching online or listening, we have a desire to want to grow in faith. We have a desire and a belief that we should have greater faith. And when we have an intent and even a motive to say, I want to be like Jesus, I want to follow Jesus, and I want to have that kind of tenacious faith, that faith that goes beyond what it's comfortable or what's known. But the fact of the matter is we just kind of feel like there's a bit of a cap, or we feel like there's a bit of a ceiling. And so we don't know how to break through, or we feel incapable of having greater faith. And here's why I think all this matters to you. Here's why this matters, because I would bet money on the fact that 90% of you here, if you were measured on your faith, or if you were to give an assessment of your own faith, you would feel like you're kind of lacking. You would feel like, I don't know that I have the level of faith that I want, or I'm not at the place where I'm living my life with such great faith that it's a legend status. And for 90% of us, we would feel like, not just that we don't have that, but we don't know that it's attainable. We don't know what it takes to get there. And there's a part of you that feels like if faith were a bank account and God were to make a withdrawal, that there would be a decline status for insufficient faith. That if your faith were a bank account, God's like, hey, it's time to make a withdrawal, it's time to take a step of faith. Like, sorry, God, you're declined, because I don't have it. I don't have the faith. I mean, if God were to ask you to take some sort of like crazy step of faith, you would go bird box on him and put on your blindfold. Like, nope. Like, Ricky, just give me the children. Take the step of faith. I know, can't do it, not taking the blindfold off. God, you're going to wait until he goes, and then you're going to kind of peek out like, okay, he's not asking me to take this step of faith anymore. I'm good. You know what I mean? Like, we feel like we're just kind of like, I don't know if God's going to ask me to take a step of faith, it's going to require something that's uncomfortable, if it's going to require a move, if it's going to require a sacrifice, if it's going to require me doing the unthinkable, I can't do it. And it's not for lack of want, but lack of understanding, or lack of kind of understanding the path that it takes to get there, what it would require of you, how to navigate the road in front of you. And so we fall short. And the truth is, because of this, I think there's some people in this room that you beat yourself up over it. You feel guilt and shame, and you feel like you're not a good enough Christian or follower of Jesus. You feel like you see other people live their lives with faith, and you think, well, what's wrong with me? What's broken in me? Why don't I have that? For them, it's so easy, or for them, it's so natural, or for them, it just seems like, yeah, duh, that's what you're supposed to do, but it doesn't work when I try it. And so you beat yourself up over it. Others of you, you're just new to this whole thing, and you're so green to it. Not new as in you met Jesus yesterday and today's your first day following Jesus, but new as in, okay, really living by faith. That's not a concept I ever learned about. That's not something anyone ever really talked about outside of believing in Jesus for salvation. And so faith has always been reduced to this. Well, as long as you believe in Jesus, then the rest, you go to church, you serve, you give some money, you check those boxes, then you've done your part. You've done everything you're supposed to do. And so it's not that you're ashamed or feel guilt as much as you just feel like, where do I start? This is brand new. How do I do this? How do I navigate this? And I'll illustrate this reality to you in a simple way, okay? I'm going to show you a question here in just a second. But don't raise your hand right away. Wait for some explanation. So here's the question, okay? Can God do it? Okay, by show of hands, how many of you would say, in general, if you see this statement, read this statement, or this question, how many of you in general would believe, yeah, by show of hands, yeah, I think God can do it. Whatever it is, just in general, I believe God can do it, okay? Look around the room, keep your hands raised. It's okay if you don't believe it, but just keep your hands raised. The majority of the room, right? Okay, put your hands down. So yeah, can God do it? Yup, I think he can. Now, here's what happens when we change the question just slightly. Can God do it for me? Now, again, by show of hands, how many would say, most of the time, I struggle to believe this part? You can show your hands if you feel that. Can God do it? Yes. Can God do it for me? I don't know. Can God create the world if he wanted to? Sure. Can God create the universe if he wanted to? Sure. Can God save me from hell? Absolutely. Can God bless those people? Sure. Can God heal that person? Absolutely. Can God provide for them in their need? 100%, no questions asked. Can God do it for me? I just don't know. And so our faith, on the one hand, is something that we can say, oh yeah, I believe it for everyone else. But when it comes to the faith that actually matters, the faith that's actually relevant to you, which is you, it's like, I don't get it. And no matter where you are on the spectrum, no matter if you're like 100% have great faith or 0% have no faith, the fact of the matter is most of us lack confidence that we could actually have the faith that God says you could have. We find ourselves fearful or maybe uncertain or unsure of what God could do or what God could speak or how God could work in us. Yes, he can work through them. Sure, he can do it for them. But for me, it feels like I'm inadequate. In my faith, there are countless times where it feels like it's insufficient. And in my life, it feels like I'm not worthy because I don't measure up to this legend status. I don't measure up to this kind of marquee point in the Christian walk where your faith is recognized by everyone else, and I'm not even close to that level. And if you feel that way, if you've ever felt that way, then this series is for you. If you've ever felt like, well, I don't know if I have faith. I don't know if I have what it takes. I don't know that this can work for me. If I don't know that I measure up when compared to everyone else, I feel that when I talk about faith, I feel like I have none of it. If you ever felt that way, then this series is for you. But you know what's interesting? I feel like when it comes to faith, the times that I'm most insufficient are the times that I'm most maybe questioning my level of faith or the faith that God has instilled in me is not when I look at other people. It's actually when I read the Bible. It's actually when I read about the stories of faith. It's actually when I look at the people that I'm supposed to follow and I feel like I don't measure up. And nowhere else is this true in my mind or as true as it is in the book of Hebrews, specifically chapter 11. And Hebrews chapter 11 is kind of what's called or what's referred to as the hall of faith. It's a chapter in which they talk about faith, the significance of faith, and then they illustrate what faith can do by using examples of people who have lived throughout history and the stories of what God did in their lives and how God worked and how God moved. And you just think like, okay, cool, this is going to be great. But then when you start reading, you're like, how? Like, who are these people? I mean, here's how it begins, right? Hebrews 11, chapter 11, verses 1 and 2. It says this: faith is the confidence that what we hope for will actually happen. Okay, that's good. It gives us assurance about things we cannot see. Great, that makes sense. Through their faith, the people in days of old earned a good reputation. Now, right here, up to this point, everything's great. If this were a hip-hop track, we'd be nodding our heads. Like, yep, I get it. I'm vibing with this. I'm flowing. Like, it totally makes sense. But this is where the problems, this is where the good part ends and then the problems begin. Because then he starts listing off all these people, the people of old, who through their faith earned a good reputation. And I'll just kind of give you, rapid fire some examples. Verse 7, it was by faith that Noah built a large boat to save his family from the flood. Noah had never seen rain, let alone needed a boat, and yet somehow he built a boat in the middle of nowhere to save his family. And all these people who were questioning him, doubting him, Noah had the faith to do it. Okay, I've never done that. It was by faith, verse 8, Abraham obeyed when God called him to leave home and go to another land that he would give them as an inheritance, and he went without knowing where he was going. Okay, we'll say, oh, it's a step of faith because I'm moving from one city to another. I'm moving from one job to another. But we know where we're going. Abraham didn't know where he was going. Abraham had not, guys, just go and I'll tell you when you get there. Go where? Just go. But where? Just go. Okay, so he goes. All right, here you go. His wife, right, Sarah. It was by faith that even Sarah was able to have a child, though she was barren and was too old. She had a child when she was 85 years old. I mean, why? I don't want to, I'm not going to ask how, because I know. But that doesn't matter. It's just why? She believed in her 80s that she could have a child. Okay, it goes this, Abraham, and again, it was by faith that Abraham offered Isaac as a sacrifice when God was testing his child. He was an offer on a mountain, and he lifted up a knife to sacrifice his son. Good God, you know how much faith you have to have, not just to lift up the knife, but to go sacrifice your son? He's not the only one they talk about. Moses, verse 24, is by faith that Moses, when he grew up, refused to be called the son of Pharaoh's daughter. He chose to share the oppression of God's people instead of enjoying the fleeting pleasures of sin. He was royalty. He said, I don't want to be royalty. I want to be oppressed. I don't want to be a king. I want to be a peasant. I don't want to be rich. I want to be poor. I don't want to be served. I want to be beat up. How? By faith. Wasn't just him. Verse 29, it was by faith that the people of Israel went right through the Red Sea, as though they were on dry ground. These people walked through a part of an ocean. They walked through a sea and said, okay, if God said it, we'll do it. And so they just marched. And it wasn't that the water had receded or cleared out. It was when they stepped into the water that the water receded and cleared out. Okay, listen, I'm reading these things and I'm like, who in the world are these people? And it just gets worse. Okay, verse 33. By faith, you'll see these now. By faith, these people overthrew kingdoms, ruled with justice, and received what God had promised them. Notice this. They shut the mouths of lions, quenched the flames of fire, and escaped death by the edge of the sword. Their weakness was turned to strength. They became strong in battle and put whole armies to flight. Women received their loved ones back from the dead, but others were tortured, refusing to turn from their God in order to be set free. They placed their hope in a better life after the resurrection. I mean, if you're a super Christian, if you're uber spiritual, then you're like, yeah, this is awesome. This is so great. These stories are epic. These people had awesome faith. But if you're normal, if you're just a regular guy like me, good God, what am I reading? A superhero book? Is this a Marvel comic? How do they do this? Forget parting a Red Sea. How do they quench, or how do they shut the mouth of a lion? Quenching fire, people coming back from the dead, people being put up to a sword and saying die, or being threatened with death, and they're like, okay. Who are these people? I was reading this scripture a few months ago, and it was just I had this moment where I was reading, and I was like, God, I've had faith in the past. I've stepped out in faith before. I've lived my life to the best of my ability, or the best understanding that I have of what it looks like, what it means to live faith expressed, and I'm trying, God. And I'm reading this back in October, and I'm just one morning sitting here looking at this, and I'm like, oh my God, I don't have what it takes. I don't measure up to this. I can't live that standard or by that standard. I've not done any of those things. I've not built an ark. I don't even know how to hammer a nail straight. You laugh, but it's true. As crooked as that thing gets, if it's in the wall, it's in the wall. It's not coming out. I've never, given up royalty to be oppressed or impoverished. I've never said, okay, God, here's a body of water. I'm just going to walk right through it. So as soon as I touch the water, please, God, just separate the water so I can do my thing. I've never been encountered with a lion because of my faith. I've just not had any of those experiences. And if I were to have those experiences, God, even then, I don't know that I'd have what it takes. I mean, am I the only one? Am I preaching myself, or is there anyone else in the room that can get what I'm talking about? Okay, good. Because you realize that this following Jesus thing on the surface is like, oh, it sounds pleasant. But when it comes to actual moments of faith, when it comes to actual steps of faith, whatever they may be in your life, and I know I joked about a couple of scenarios, but whatever the real step of faith that God is asking you to take, whatever that level of faith is, whatever that step of faith is, the fact of the matter is there are moments and times and situations where we feel like, I don't have what it takes. I can't get there. I can't do that. I can't become that. I don't have that. And to think that if I'm supposed to live in this way, if I'm supposed to follow Jesus, and I'm supposed to get to that status, how in the world would I ever get that? Because I can't become this, or I'm not this at the moment. But fortunately, as I was reading, I realized that the chapter doesn't end there. Continues on. There's some more things he wrote, some more things that don't get better, but eventually it got better, and it got better around verse 39. And it says this: all these people, the ones that I just kind of highlighted, the ones that he's referring to, all these people earned a good reputation because of their faith, yet none of them received all that God had promised. Now pause for a second. Wouldn't that just make you mad? Like, wouldn't that just bother you? I mean, God, I walked through the Red Sea. I built an ark. I mean, in my spare time, my wife got pregnant when she was 85. God, what are you doing here? God, I took my kid up to the top of Mount Moriah. I was ready to sacrifice him. And yet they didn't receive what God had promised. At least not all of it. Verse 40. For God had something better in mind for, notice this next word, us. So that they would not reach perfection without, let's say this last word together, reach perfection without us. Us, the word us. I started by talking about words. I want to close by ending with a word. The word us. And this is huge. I don't want you to miss this. This is significant. This matters. Because the whole series is built off of this word in that sentence, us. What we're going to talk about for the next 5 weeks, the journey we're going to go on, the things we're going to communicate, it's about us. And bigger than this series, bigger than this teaching, bigger than this church is you and the potential impact this word us can have on you and your faith. And the significance that God could use or could bring to your life through this word us. Because you see, a couple months ago when I was reading this passage, I had that mini freak out moment, and I kind of concluded the chapter and arrived to the end, and this word us just stood out. It just struck me like a laser light, just kind of focused right on this 2-letter word. Because God was illustrating, God was pointing out, God was highlighting, saying, listen, yes, they had great faith. Yes, they earned a good reputation. Yes, they did the unthinkable or the impossible. But listen, they're still waiting for you, me, us, as the writer of Hebrews put it. That all these people, for as great accomplishments as they have, for as great as their resume is, the resume of faith, listen, something is missing. They're still waiting on something, and that something they're waiting on is us. The thing that they're waiting to receive their deposit, to receive their payment, to receive their reward is in this room. It's represented in you. That God had spoken something to them, but told them it wouldn't be fulfilled until you were present, until you achieved legend status, until you arrived to the game, until you showed up so that you could help complete us. And I think this is really fascinating because what it illustrates or what it communicates to me is that God is waiting on us. God is withholding something for them or from them because he knows he has something he wants to give for us. And he doesn't want them to experience it yet apart from us. So instead, God is inviting us. God is calling us. God is challenging us. And he's bringing us to a place where we can live with greater faith. Where we can live with a faith that represents those or depicts those or mimics those that we see written about in scriptures. Because God is calling us into this thing. And he's not just calling us, and he's not just inviting us, and he's not just waiting on us, but he's guiding us. He's empowering us. He's equipping us. And he's leading us so that we can live with a faith that represents what we see in the scriptures, but more importantly, achieves that legend status, not for the sake of having a status, because God isn't interested in that. God is interested in revealing himself through the world through our faith. He's interested in showing off in your life, through your life, and around your life. And so he's willing to wait. He's willing to withhold something in order that we would step into it. Now, I don't know if you've ever been in a situation like this, where you are waiting on something, a reward of some kind, a prize of some kind, a financial blessing of some kind, but you cannot receive what is rightfully yours until someone else does their part. You ever miss a paycheck? I know there's some federal government employees that this is a really sensitive subject, so I apologize. Not in here, but somewhere out there in the internet. You know why you missed that paycheck? Was because someone in HR didn't do their part. And so what was rightfully yours, what had been promised to you by your employer, wasn't given to you because someone else didn't do their part. How did you feel? Did you feel great about it? Feel happy that you didn't have your paycheck? Was your creditor or your landlord happy that you didn't have the money? Where they would say, oh, I didn't get paid. Well, oh, okay, I understand. No problem. We'll wait. Of course not. They were upset. You were upset. You were bothered because what was rightfully yours was delayed because someone didn't do their part. Now imagine on the flip side of this thing of faith. Those who have lived with legendary faith are waiting on us to step into the game. They've done their part, and they're not mad at us, but they're cheering us on like, hey, if I did it, you can do it. If I stepped into it, you can step into it. If God called me, he can call you. If God gave me faith, then he'll give you faith. Because listen, here's the thing, this legend status where we think about all these people, whether it's me or Krista or the people you read about in scriptures or whoever else you look up to in the category of faith, those people that you say they're way, way up here, we didn't all start up here. We started somewhere down here. And it was just moment after moment of being obedient, of being faithful, of believing that if we took a step of faith, good things would come out of it. If we tried, wherever we were led in faith, if we just took off that blindfold, if you will, and said, okay, God, I don't know that I have what it takes, but I'm willing to take a step. The faith we crave, the faith we long for, the faith we believe in would actually manifest itself in our lives and would actually come through. And so what we're going to do in this series for the next 5 weeks is just follow along. We're going to look at some of the OGs of the faith that they talk about in Hebrews 11, and we're going to learn from them. We're going to look at their lives and say, okay, well, how did they get to that legend status? How did they become that? And then what can I take away and apply to my own life, no matter how big or how small a scale? And so what I want to do through this series is my prayer and my heart has been that you will find a path for you that leads you to legendary faith. My prayer has been that you would see that God actually can and will use you through faith once you step out in faith. I remember a few years ago praying for faith. In fact, ironically enough, it was February 2014. So nearly a whole year before that 2015 year that I told you about. And praying, God, I need faith for this situation I'm in. I need faith for this time of life. And I remember someone posing the question to me, if you pray for faith, will God give you more faith or will he give you more opportunities to practice faith? Will he give it to you or will he give you more opportunities to practice it? Because faith is a muscle. It's not a gift. The good news is we can all develop that muscle. So can I ask you to follow along? Can I ask that for the next 5 weeks, you'll give it a shot? You'll take a step of faith wherever God is asking you to. You'll commit to hearing and learning about the path. And listen, if it's not for you, then it's not for you. But if you're saying, hey, I want to have more faith. Hey, I feel inadequate in my faith. I feel insufficient in my faith. I feel like I don't have what it takes, but I want it. Then I just want to ask you to follow along. I want to ask you to trust in the process as God leads you. I want to ask you to commit as God reveals things to you. And I want to ask you to step one at a time. I'm not asking you to walk on water. I'm just asking you to take one foot out of the boat. And my prayer and my belief is that as you do that, you'll find yourself living with greater faith. You'll find yourself on the path to legend status. And you'll see 2019 be your greatest year of faith yet. Can we commit to that? Great. Let me pray for us.